Defense News. It's proudly sponsored by Navy Federal Credit Union. If you're a member of our nation's armed forces, the Department of Defense, or if your family is, we'd be proud to serve you too.
On this episode of Defense News Weekly, we get you an exclusive look at the USS Gerald R. Ford, whose carrier strike group was recently fighting Houthi rebels in Yemen. And Congress has had a lot of craziness, but also a lot of military news. We cut through the noise to get you the news that matters. Also, you've heard a lot of news recently from the Black Sea, and so we check in with our reporter from Turkey to update you. And we take you to B-52 Crew Ground School. You don't want to miss it. It's the latest in news and analysis from the Pentagon to the platoon, here on Defense News Weekly. Welcome back to Defense News Weekly. I'm Diana Stancy. In May, the aircraft carrier Gerald R. Ford steamed away from Naval Station Norfolk, poised to operate in the European theater for its first full-length combat deployment. But 6 months at sea and just weeks before the warship's scheduled return home, the Pentagon ordered the carrier to adopt a new mission and head to the eastern Mediterranean after Palestinian militant group Hamas attacked Israel in October. As a result, Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin approved multiple extensions for the carrier's deployment, totaling an additional 76 days at sea, so the ship could deter further escalation of a broader conflict. Over the course of 239 days at sea, the ship's crew logged more than 83,000 nautical miles, nearly 18,000 flight hours, 10,000 plus sorties, and performed 43 underway replenishments, moving 20 million gallons of fuel. Now back in its home port, the Ford crew is getting a break from operations, and I got a chance to visit the ship while reporting for Navy Times. I spoke to the Ford's commanding officer, Captain Rick Burgess, about the deployment and what's next for the Navy's newest carrier.
We didn't prepare for the specific deployment we thought we were going to do. Like, we weren't preparing for a European. We were actually preparing to operate under any mission set, anything that we were asked to do. So we really spent a lot of time maintaining readiness, and we had to build it. So we did that through the first part of deployment, and that ended up serving us well when we were redeployed with a different mission set.
Despite these extensions, Captain Burgess said the morale didn't dramatically dip and came at the ship's highest level of readiness.
Having an open, honest discussion with them about what was going on, what we knew, what we didn't know, and then doing it quickly and communicating the same to the spouses really kept both the families at home together and the crew, and that was a great lesson learned for us.
The Ford arrived back in Norfolk in January and is now undergoing a maintenance availability before deploying again. And now to Congress. While you've heard a lot about the dysfunction on Capitol Hill, military life has been a hot topic there. In fact, the House Armed Services Committee recently rolled out a committee focused on service member quality of life issues and got to work by bringing in the top enlisted advisors for each service and the Joint Chiefs of Staff. Military Times Capitol Hill Bureau Chief Leo Shane III joined Daniel Woolfolk to discuss that and other recent news out of Washington, D.C.
Leo, if anybody is watching the news and listening, there's a lot of dysfunction up on Capitol Hill, but you're our Military Times Capitol Hill Bureau Chief, and we're going to cut through it today and see what is actually being discussed that is of interest to people in the military. So welcome to the show. Good to see you back.
No, thanks for having me back.
First up, the House Armed Services Committee has a relatively new quality of life panel that they created last year. Why did they create that panel?
Yeah, this is really to zero in on some of those key issues for junior enlisted troops, troops with families, some of the things that lawmakers feel have been overlooked over the years. So they're taking a close look at military compensation, particularly younger troops. What are they getting paid? Is it enough? They're looking at housing, they're looking at child care, they're looking at medical care access, things that they think will could hurt families. Do they need more benefits? Do they need changes? And things that eventually down the line will hurt retention and recruiting if they can't get them fixed.
And they recently, last month, had a panel with, it was really interesting, it was with all of the senior enlisted advisors to each of the services, as well as the senior enlisted advisor to the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. And their topic that time was exactly that, your wallet.
The prospect of equitable pay and income is the foundation of our all-volunteer force and has impacts to both recruiting and retention.
It's crucial these men and women are fairly compensated for their dedication, sacrifice, and service they provide our nation.
Healthcare, housing, childcare, and pay and benefits are critical components of a ready and healthy force, and I'm confident that we can find common ground in a bipartisan way to do what is right for our most important military assets, our people.
Military pay and compensation reform is going to be one of those big problems that we need to start taking a bite at today.
We have not done a targeted pay raise for your military service members since 2007.
We're dealing with a defense budget that is inadequate, in my opinion. It's something we need to continue to put our money where our mouth is from the Congress side and make sure that we are providing that pay and compensation.
The quadrennial review of military compensation is underway, and I'm hopeful that the recommendations you hear from the individual services will be addressed.
And so you hear a lot about pay right there. Should service members expect a big increase in their paychecks anytime soon in the next year or two?
Yeah, so lawmakers are really looking at this. They want to put something in place this year to go into effect in early 2025, and really something focused on those junior enlisted service members, those folks who might be making less than $30,000 a year in base pay. And they say it's just not enough. They need to close some of the gap between those folks and the higher paid and officer folks who are in the service. Now, DoD has been somewhat resistant to this idea. As you heard in the clip, they've got this quadrennial military compensation review that's going on. That should be finished sometime early next year. When the report comes out, they want that to be the basis of looking at some longer term changes to military pay and military compensation. But that would push any targeted pay raises back to 2026, 2027, maybe even further. And from what I've heard from lawmakers on the Hill, they want it as soon as possible. They want it to start next year if they can, even if it's just some incremental steps, because they feel like the entire compensation system is just out of whack right now.
And as well as family separation pay, there's something kind of interesting there where, let's see if I get this one right. The Congress approved family separation pay increase to $400 from $250, but the DoD hasn't yet implemented it. Let's see what Tony Gonzalez has to say. We talked to him recently up on the Hill. He represents Texas.
The timeline should be now. Having spent 20 years in the military, having been deployed for years of that 20 years, family separation allowance is so critical to our military families. The fact that it hasn't been raised in decades is almost criminal. And the fact that we got it to 400, is incremental. There absolutely has to be more that needs to happen. They're not going to implement it immediately. I've already had conversations with several folks at the Pentagon. We'll continue to have these conversations, and I will push for them to get it done immediately. There's no reason why families should be put last in the military equation.
So you heard Representative Gonzalez there say that the timeline should be now. It's been approved by Congress, but not implemented yet. Well, what's the holdup, Leo?
Yeah, the holdup seems to be that DoD is saying they don't want to put it in place right now. They're still looking at their full compensation package, and they don't know if that extra $150 a month is really needed to help cover the expenses of families who are dealing with the separation from deployments or overseas assignments. Representative Gonzalez was one of the key forces behind this when they included it in the annual defense authorization bill last year. And as you heard, he's pretty angry that this didn't go into effect. Congress seems convinced that $250 a month just isn't enough to cover all of the extra expenses that military families are dealing with. But DoD says, look, we just can't push it up to $400 a month yet. That's going to be a big cost, and we don't know if it's really needed. So we're going to hold off for now. The way the language was written was not that they have to raise it to $400, that they should raise it to $400. They're authorized to do it. But I think some lawmakers now are looking at that to say, hey, do we need to change the language to say, put this change in place right now, because We weren't just offering it as a suggestion. We really wanted this to be increased.
Leo, we'll see how the conversation between the two plays out. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Thanks, Daniel. Up next, we learn the latest news from the strategically vital Black Sea. The Black Sea, separating NATO countries from Russia, has had quite a bit of recent headlines. Ukraine said its autonomous naval drone sank a Russian ship. In addition, 3 area countries signed a treaty to help clear underwater mines from the waterway in hopes of clearing it for transit. To catch up on developments, Daniel Woolfolk spoke to Defense News Turkey correspondent Tayfun Uzberg.
There's been so much news coming out of the Black Sea recently. Tayfun, I think one of the biggest stories has been the Ukrainian Navy sinking a Russian warship. Tell us about that.
Ukraine sunk 2 Russian warships in this month with kamikaze unmanned surface vessels. As a matter of fact, they have been doing this since the fall of 2022. Russian Black Sea fleet has lost more than half of their fleet. They lost 4 or 5 warships with USV attacks. This is significant, and this refers to a paradigm shift in naval warfare.
That is quite the paradigm shift. I think in land warfare, we've been seeing a lot of aerial drones, right? Somebody, with a DJI and they rig a grenade or something, and protecting against that has been very difficult. And it seems like a lot of attention has been on that. Has there been enough attention on countering unmanned surface naval drones?
Yeah, Russian fleet couldn't develop a solid countermeasures against these drones so far. They are not safe even at their mother bases. As a matter of fact, countering such a threat is difficult for any naval ship, and even the strongest ones, because these vessels are very small and swift, and detecting them are difficult, especially at severe sea conditions, because they have very small radar cross-section, and these drones carry more than 300 kilograms of explosive, which is enough to neutralize or sink a warship. The ships must be on watch for 24 hours to counter such a threat, because they have to detect them far enough to show enough countermeasures. And when these drones are in a swarm formation, like a drone squadron, it's even more dangerous.
How did it affect the Russian Navy in general for the overall war effort?
As a matter of fact, Russian Navy has lost their ability to control in the region as a result of these attacks, because they have lost half of their fleet. The Russian Black Sea fleet is not as strong as in the beginning of the war. February 2022, they were operating independently in the approaching waters of Ukraine, in the territorial waters of Ukraine, and now Ukraine established an anti-access and area denial zone with land-based anti-ship missiles and these surface drones, and Russian Black Sea fleet cannot approach Ukrainian waters in the meantime.
That's an unnerving threat to have an unmanned surface vessel come at your ship potentially, but also a more classic threat in the Black Sea has been underwater mines. And I understand there's been an agreement within 3 countries to kind of help that overall threat or that overall danger in the Black Sea. Can you explain that one to us?
The sea mine threat has emerged in March 2022, just 1 month after the Ukraine war started. After that, many sea mines were detected at the shoreline of Odessa, Romania, Bulgaria, and even Turkey. Some mines exploded on the coast, others were safely neutralized, and unfortunately, some of that drifting mines hit merchant and naval vessels. That's why 3 Black Sea states started the mine countermeasures initiative in the Black Sea. Indeed, this was a vital necessity to make Black Sea safe for the ships and sustain the logistic flow in the region. If this danger is not eliminated, the cost of the ships, the cost of transportation, such as insurance, will increase, and it would affect the prices of all products. So we shouldn't consider this as a regional issue, because it impacts other regions as well.
If I may, you were a Turkish naval officer. How scary is mines and all these threats that you can't actually see when you're traversing or going underway in a sea?
As a matter of fact, sea mines are very dangerous for any ship because they cannot discriminate the target. And when you deploy a sea mine, it is a threat for anyone, for your friendly forces and your enemies. And in this case, the most challenging part is these mines are not fixed. They are drifting on the water. And it's claiming that these mines previously placed in an area, but they have broken off their chains and started drifting independently at sea. So we cannot know when or where they may strike a vessel.
You mentioned that some of these mines drift. In my mind, I'm from the desert, like a tumbleweed. That seems absolutely terrifying. I'm sure that I've heard that, these countries are using maritime patrol aircraft, MPAs, to search for drones. And what does that process look like?
All three countries have MCM vessels. Turkish Navy has one of the largest MCM fleet in the region, and it has mine hunters and EOD teams and unmanned underwater vehicles. And Romania and Bulgaria has some MCM ships as well. The Turkish Navy is using unmanned aerial vehicles to detect sea mines, and they fitted a synthetic aperture radar on that drones to detect sea mines, because detecting sea mines is like looking for a needle in a haystack. So it's very difficult, and it's very difficult to detect with electro-optic sensors. So you need something special, something specific to detect such very tiny objects on a wide sea.
Thank you so much for coming on the show today.
Thank you very much, Daniel. It was my pleasure. Thanks for the invitation.
When we return, our personal finance expert has advice for you on creating a basic monthly budget. Welcome back. On this edition of Money Minute, personal finance expert Jeanette Mack shows you how to create a basic monthly budget.
NerdWallet says 74% of Americans have a monthly budget, so it's likely you have one. That's great, but how are you doing with that? Having a budget and sticking to it are two very different things. If you're in the military, your paycheck makes it easier for you to budget. Food and housing are paid for or subsidized, so essentially what's left is what you can budget with. Carve out as much savings as you can. 20% is the sweet spot. This goes for everyone, not just servicemen and women. The key is to spend within or below your means. Try not to overspend. This is a budget killer. Overspending has a snowball effect because you're probably spending what you need for the next month. And before you know it, you're going from paycheck to paycheck. You might even go into a budget deficit. To keep your head way above water, you need to know your limit. Know exactly how much you have to spend on extras after savings and bills, and stick to it. That way, you'll go from just having a budget to winning at one.
Thanks, Jeanette. We'll see you next week. To get more coverage of military and defense topics, look up from that radar terminal to check out militarytimes.com and defensenews.com for more headlines. And to be the only scout who can see beyond line of sight, sign up for our early bird brief, compiled each morning to bring you the most up-to-date headlines. It's also in audio. Check out the podcast version out each weekday. And if social media is where you collect open source intelligence, follow us on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and X. And like most junior service members, we're on TikTok, so go find us there as well. Welcome back. I'm Diana Stancy. As you might expect, flying on an aging B-52 isn't as simple as checking a bag and going through TSA. A ride in one of America's oldest bombers requires a wealth of training for air crews and visitors alike. Air warfare reporter Stephen Losey recently visited Barksdale Air Force Base in Louisiana to learn about the updates coming to the Stratofortress and to hitch a ride with the 11th Bomb Squadron. Have a look at some of the training he went through along the way.
A major part of the U.S. Air Force's strategic arsenal is the B-52 Stratofortress, a Cold War-era workhorse that can carry out a wide range of missions and payloads, everything from unguided bombs to cruise missiles, even to next-generation hypersonic weapons. In the words of one commander, if it can fly or be dropped off an aircraft, the B-52 has probably done it. But what remains of the Stratofortress fleet has been in service since the early 1960s, and going aloft inside of one for both aircrew and visitors like me requires special training. We've come to Barksdale Air Force Base in Louisiana to get a first-hand look at what it takes to keep America's largest and oldest bombers part of its fighting force. And today, it's all about the airmen. The first step to prepare for our B-52 flight is to get fitted for a flight helmet.
Best way to do it is to put this to your forehead.
Okay.
And kind of pull this apart and kind of.
These things are a tight fit, and putting them on in the right way is necessary to prevent injury. It's snug. I think it should be snug, right?
It's supposed to be snug.
Okay,
But it
gotcha.
shouldn't be depleting you of oxygen to your
Yeah.
brain.
Yeah, no, I don't think so. Now that I've got my helmet, it's time to get my oxygen mask fitted. It's important to get a tight seal to make sure the oxygen is going straight into my lungs and not leaking out into the aircraft.
For your flight, you're going to come in here, grab your helmet, and you're going to take it to this tester. So you're going to take these little metal things, they're called bayonets, and they're going to go into these little slots.
Okay.
Are you feeling any air escaping and putting air into your glasses, or your nose, or anything? You know, tack it down, which is just taking thread and piercing it and make sure it stays in place.
Okay. Thank you. Now, I'm sure everything's going to go well with our B-52 flight tomorrow, but just in case something happens, we're going to need to be ready to punch out. That's why they're going to teach us how to eject and parachute safely out of a Stratofortress.
Really, the thing that I want you gentlemen to remember first and foremost is if you have to manually bail out, pull this so it set off that timer that's going to go off at a predetermined altitude, or if and when you feel you're getting too close to the ground, pull that T-handle and then ensure you have a globe above your head. You do a parachute landing fall where your feet and knees are going to be together, which you gentlemen know, and then essentially it's just graceful falling, right? Feet and knees together, eyes on the horizon, chin on chest, because you do fall so quickly, and then your points of contact are going to be here, here, and here, right? Or the other side. If you forget everything else, that's fine. Know that you have a good canopy. Keep your feet and knees together, prepare to land. But the other steps in between there are, right, canopy's good, my visor out of the way, my mask, seat kit, 4 lines, and then steer to where you want to land. Any questions? No? Okay, so we want your feet and knees together, your chin on your chest, hands on the canopy releases, and all you do is pop off this box so you can practice trying to keep your body together as best you possibly can, right?
Now that we've learned how to deploy the parachute, it's time to learn how to control it. To do this, we strapped into a parachute simulator, which is a snug fit to say the least. Behind me is a model of the B-52 cockpit. Here's where we're going to learn how to move around inside, and if it comes to an ejection, how that whole process would work. Should I have a seat here?
Yeah, you can sit right there. So you've strapped in. You're going to raise your armrests.
Should I do that now?
Yeah.
Okay, so
and then the very last thing you do after you've done everything else is you take out the pins. And then you'll kind of roll it up.
take it like that?
Store it right in there. At this point, you'll only have to rotate the arming levers and then pull the triggers.
Okay.
There you go. Now don't do anything just yet. Our hatch is gone. We rotated the arming levers. That's what caused the hatch to go. Now to do the triggers, that's what this is right here.
Okay, so I move my hands from here to here.
So you're gonna do this. Here, can I show you?
Oh, I see. Okay.
Yep.
So
You do it on do it on both sides. Yep, do it like that. And that vibration is just telling you like you did it right. The seat went, you know.
Yeah.
So
I've now punched out.
you have left the aircraft. Yeah.
Up next, it's time to get airborne. Join us in our next episode to see what it's like to fly in a B-52 bomber.
Thanks, Stephen. For more coverage of Stephen's trip to Barksdale, head to militarytimes.com or our social feeds. That's all we have time for in this episode. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next week.